Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. This is the Conference USA preview. I'm Mike Calabrese, and I'm joined by my Group of 5 deep dive co-pilot, Duck. We're breaking down the 12-team league that, for lack of a better phrase, it's been a halfway house for programs dating back to when it was founded in 1995. Major P4 programs like Cincinnati, Houston, Louisville, SMU, TCU, UCF, they all started here in Conference USA or played at some point in Conference USA before making their way up in the college football world. So this has been a launching pad for a lot of great programs. But I'm going to hit you with a piece of trivia to get you invested in Conference USA right from the jump here, Duck. There is one SEC school, Vanderbilt, that is actually an affiliate member of Conference USA in which NCAA sanctioned sport.
I didn't look this up. I saw that this was in the notes. I thought it was bowling, and so I think it's bowling.
Bowling is correct. Who do you think you are? I am. Between the lanes, Vanderbilt is cutting it up with the rest of Conference USA. There's got to be a story there. Why? I mean, I don't know if the SEC kicked him out. The SEC has a bowling league. I don't even know the backstory, but I think it is fun to see a Power 4 program cut it up with Conference USA teams as well. Now, right off the bat, I want to say something positive about this much maligned conference. They're the butt of the joke. They're constantly taking paychecks to get their heads caved in every single fall. But unlike Power 4 football, where we just had a 2-loss national champion, Ohio State gets this huge mulligan. Well, every single game matters in Conference USA. If you have any aspirations of making the 12-team college football playoff, you got to win every single game. And that applies to 12, scratch that, 10 teams. Sorry, Delaware and Missouri State. You're going to have to wait for your eligibility to kick in. For the other 10 teams in Conference USA, you got to go ahead and have a perfect run. And I think that's going to build some excitement in this conference. There could be some early upsets in the non-conference portion of the schedule. And this is a conference that produced a 13-0 champion in Liberty just 2 seasons ago. Jamie Chadwell had it all going. They get to the Fiesta Bowl. They got their heads stomped in that game against Oregon, but they were at least able to do it. And if you go 13-0 again this year, you're certainly in the conversation. It's no guarantee because of strength of schedule. But when you look at the strength of schedule across the league out of conference, you got LSU, Penn State, Texas, USC, all on the schedule. Maybe some magic happens. Maybe there's a giant killer or two in this group. Let's find out. Let's jump in with the very top of the conference, at least in the predicted finish, and that is the Liberty Flames. They went 8-4 last year, 5-3 in the CUSA. A Bahama Bowl loss to Buffalo 26-7. They mailed in a bunch of games, as we know. They were a letdown at multiple points. They had that huge upset loss to Kennesaw, which made the Owls season. But it just seemed like the vibes were off really from the get-go for a team that brought back Caden Salter. You figured that they were going to be so effective. Now, this year, they're plus 140 to win Conference USA. Their win total is sitting at 9.5. Why? Because this is the worst schedule in the FBS. Of 136 teams, they're the very bottom of the barrel. What's interesting, I wrote this up for the Action Network app already, 7-1 payout on a perfect regular season. And when you look at the schedule, they're going to be favored in 11, maybe 12 games, depending on what happens in that James Madison game on their home field. And let's start breaking down a little bit of what makes them so formidable here in the conference. 7 starters returning, 2 on offense, 5 on defense. They played a ton of kids last year, which is actually why they returned the 15th most production in FBS football, 13th on the defensive side of the ball at 72%. Tremendous coaching continuity for a G5 school. You usually see the coaching carousel heat up, and anyone with any modicum of success is out the door for a P4 job. Well, they got the same head coach, the same OC, the same DC, and also some co's in there as well. So the coaching staff really top to bottom has that continuity. Now let's get into the schedule. Obviously, the most challenging games are against James Madison. They also draw Bowling Green, which would have been more difficult last year, albeit on the road this time. They got their home tilt with James Madison on September 20th. They avoid Western, which is critical in the regular season. Another reason why I like them at 7-1 to have a perfect 12-0 regular season this fall. And they draw Jacksonville State before they can get acclimated to that coaching and scheme change. So those are the 2 teams that played for the Conference USA belt last year. Western not there, and Jacksonville State exactly when you want to get them early in September. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Ethan Basco is the right fit for this offense. He's proven through high school and his collegiate days thus far that he is a dynamic and willing runner. Caden Salter had athleticism, but at times he didn't seem to want to get involved in the read game, in the option game, putting his head down, getting those extra yards, getting some of those gritty yards. You look at Vasco, this is a guy who scored 10 touchdowns in a high school game in Virginia. You'll go back just a few years at Coastal, had 170 yards on the ground against Old Dominion. He had 4 games last year with 50 yards or more rushing. So I look at that as the Coastal line was kind of a mess. They were 83rd in line yards last year. This Liberty offensive line, I think, has an opportunity to be really strong thanks to the portal. They're breaking in 3 new starters, but they're building around Aaron Fenimore at center, who could be a real rock for them. Defensively, this is where I'd like to get you involved here, Duck, and kind of get your thoughts, because I think this secondary could be special, at least by Conference USA standards, and they need to get back to their 2023 Havoc-minded defense. They finished 10th in Havoc, and they intercepted 21 passes to lead the country in that area. Last season, those numbers dipped to 78th in Havoc and 97th in INTs. And also you add in the fact that they lose TJ Bush on the edge, which hurts a lot. He got absorbed by the Calgorithm. He's off there to play at Berkeley. So can CJ Bazille Jr. be enough on the other side? He has 14 and a half career tackles for loss, but they need more pop. They need more negative plays. They need more quarterbacks putting the ball in harm's way, because they're, the back half of this defense, the linebackers, the defensive backs, every position is going to be manned by a junior or senior, a lot of experience, a lot of potential havoc in the defensive secondary. As I mentioned, 12-1 or 12-0 at 7-1. I think that's a good bet. Positions them to be obviously in the Conference USA title game as well. I think when you look at the schedule, it's just difficult to pick out the, even the situational spots to play against them. They get Delaware and Missouri State, the newcomers, both at home. They got an FCS opponent in Maine in the opener, and 3 more opponents with first-year head coaches. 6 of their opponents were actually at the FCS level just 3 years ago. Shout out to the Solid Verbal podcast for that little nugget. So that just shows how weak the schedule is. I love Chadwell. I love the staff. I think Vasco is the right mix here offensively and giving, what he's able to do as a dual threat. Let's start with the defense first, Duck. Do you think they're going to be able to get closer to, let's call it, a top 25 finish in Havoc? And if so, what's that domino effect on them this fall?
I do think the defense will be just fine. I like the continuity in the coaching staff that you had previously mentioned. They're going to throw out some unique looks. They run a 4-2-5. They run some 3-3-5. They run multiple fronts. And so I think that they will have an opportunity with what they bring back in the defensive line. They're somewhat undersized in the defensive line, but they are very athletic and quick. I think CJ Bazille will have a really good season this year for Liberty. I think the linebacker group, they bring in enough experience and a couple of FCS transfers that I think that they'll probably be a unit that is at least on par or comparable with what we saw last season. And I think the secondary, with some of the unique looks that they present against some of the teams that are migrating to more of a pass offense, will provide some challenges in league play. So I think defensively, I really don't have a real caveat on this team being any worse than what they were last year. I think really it comes down to if they can retool the offense. You mentioned Ethan Vasco, who I think is just an absolutely perfect fit to run this offense. He was recruited in high school by Jamie Chadwell at Coastal Carolina and should jump right in, plug and play with the system. I think that the running back room, they'll kind of be by committee a little more this year, but I think Vaughn Blue is a talented player. Caden Williams, the youngster, is going to be just fine in the running back room. They'll need a few receivers to emerge. But I think overall, I think this group will be one that will see Chadwell coach this team a little bit differently this year than what happened last year. When you look at 2023 and the exquisite regular season this Liberty Flames team had, they ended up playing in the New Year's Six Bowl, and then last year they kind of just rolled their group out there so many times and played such uninspired football, even in wins. They had a miracle comeback against New Mexico State that they really had no business winning. They played UTEP close for a half. It took a miracle for them to beat East Carolina. They kind of went through the motions against FIU. Then the stunning loss to Kennesaw State is really where the alarm bells sounded with this group that, man, there was really something wrong. Caden Salter just did not look like himself. He really wasn't motivated, like you had mentioned, to stick his nose in there in the run game. And it was just really staggering to see kind of a drop off of intensity and attitude with this Liberty Flames offense. They beat UMass by 1, and they just did not have the season that this group ended up wanting to have. It was really a disappointing season. So I think that Chadwell coaches this group a little bit differently this season and really plays on some motivation, because they were embarrassed by Kennesaw State. And it was really staggering to see a 26.5-point favorite lose that game against the worst team in conference play. This year, I think the schedule does provide some unique challenges, albeit not against exceedingly difficult opponents. We're going to get an absolute tone setter in week 2. They start conference play on the road at rebuilding Jacksonville State, and certainly that's a game that is circled for Liberty in red ink. That's one they're going to want to get to set their season off right. Then we mentioned the non-conference bout against Sunbelt darling James Madison, and that's going to be a real interesting G5 showdown between two of the premier teams in the Group of 5 conference, with the winner having the upper hand at a potential college football playoff berth later on down the season. Snuck in between those two is a trip to Bowling Green, and Bowling Green is a rebuilding program, but that'll just certainly be a situation where it'll be a little bit more of a tricky spot for Liberty, specifically against the number where I anticipate they're laying 12 or 13 points on the road. So we'll have to keep an eye on that against the spread wagering spot later on down the line. And then they've also got in-state rival Old Dominion on the schedule before they really ramp up conference play. So I think that there are some spots where we're really going to learn a lot about this Liberty team in the non-conference and how they start conference play in week 2. I have them circled in a couple of spots that I think are favorable in conference play. There's no bigger spot than how they conclude their season hosting Kennesaw State in a game that they are absolutely going to want to drop the anvil. And so we'll have to circle back to that when we get to that point in the season. But I think overall this will be a very successful season for Liberty. I think that I'm really interested to see how Chadwell motivates and coaches this team, and I think that the urgency on both sides of the ball will be significantly heightened this season for the Flames.
You just can't tie up your money at plus 140. It's a pass from me on the conference title odds. As I mentioned, the 7-1 is interesting as a flyer. You know, you throw a quarter unit, a half unit on it. And then really your only hedge, in my opinion, early in the season is against James Madison. But what's interesting with Sluka being the offensive engine and such a willing runner and someone that you have to account for in the run game, they're going to get a little preview of that with Jacksonville State with Wimsett at quarterback. He was so dynamic as a red zone rusher at Rutgers just a few years ago. So we'll see if that familiarity helps them against the Dukes. But that could be a bet that could be headed in the right direction or dead on arrival by September 20th. So if you want some instant gratification on a futures play, I think you could do worse than 7-1 on a perfect Liberty regular season. That is it for the Flames. We are on to their main competition in Conference USA, and that's the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers. A lot of experience last year because they played 14 games. They went 8-6, 6-2 in conference play. They go in the Boca Raton Bowl, lose to James Madison by 10, 27-17. 4-1 to win Conference USA. The win total sitting at 7.5. They returned just 3 starters, 1 on offense, 2 on defense. 125th in returning production outside of the top 115 on both sides of the ball. The continuity here, though, Tyson Heldon returns for his 7th season at Western. He's taken them to a bowl every single year. He's killed in conference play, 34-13, all top 4 finishes for Helton, and deals with paycheck games. You know, has no problem taking those and taking his lumps, Alabama, Ohio State in recent years. So if there's only 3 returning starters and the returning production is not there, why all this optimism? Well, right away, we get a brand new offensive coordinator from Abilene Christian in Rick Bowie. Not Bowie, Rick Bowie. Know the name, because this is the 5th straight year Western Kentucky has had a new offensive coordinator. So this musical chairs, in some cases, has really helped them. In other years, it's hurt them. His offenses at ACU last year finished 4th in total offense and helped them win their first ever FCS playoff game. Nearly upset Texas Tech in the opener. Idaho, they also had, you know, in a really precarious position late in that game. Idaho was an FCS power. High scoring games there, and it made Maverick McIver a star. This is the name. I'm hoping this gets to be our new Zappy sound drop. If only there was a lot of Maverick-related sound drops that we could make. Just please, producers, just machine gun these throughout the season for us, because he is going to be somebody who potentially could throw for 4,500 yards, just absolutely go ballistic in this conference that has a lot of issues in the secondary for some of the defenses he's going to face. And Mav comes to Western, as I mentioned, with Bowie as his offensive coordinator. He looked flawless in the spring. 5 drives, 5 touchdowns. I understand it's spring football. You don't want to put too much into it. I think last year, Gio Lopez went 1 for 13 or something like that, or 0 for 13 in spring ball. So obviously there's always different elements. There's different formats. Coaches are looking for, different responses from different players, but 5 drives, 5 touchdowns, can't get better than that. Defensive coordinator is new as well. Devon Brown and Davis Merritt are going to be co-DCs there. Brown was promoted from DB coach, while Merritt was the linebacker coach from last season. Tyson Summers, the takeaway king, is now gone. He was the old DC. He's off to coach up the Colorado State defense. So something just to keep in mind in terms of the impact on their defense. This was a team that hung their hat on being able to get those takeaways, helping in the field position, and obviously giving them a leg up in every single game that they played. The defense, though, all right, let's start with the attrition. They lost their top 12 tacklers. So how much can we actually know about this defense? By the way, they were also awful against the run last year with all those tacklers on the field. They gave up 3,097 rushing yards. If that seems like a lot, that is an impossible amount of rushing yards to give up. They joined the 3,000 club, which is a special kind of dreadful on that side of the ball. And the thing we know about Bowie from his ACU days is he's going to play fast, which means more plays for the Hilltoppers and more plays for their opponents. So his offense at ACU was top 5 in terms of plays run, over 1,000 last season. The defense, as a result, also faced the 5th most defensive snaps in the country. So to me, this screams bet over every single week with Hilltopper games. This was a team that cashed more unders than overs last season. So what I'm hoping is that there's a little bit of a hangover effect, or people are looking at some of the stats from last year and some of the tempo numbers early on, and they get left in the dust, because I'm not sure this market is going to be able to adjust fast enough to what Maverick and Bowie are going to be doing offensively. I lean over on the win total at 7.5. I think they're going to be right in the thick of the CUSA title race the whole way. But this schedule features roadies at Toledo and LSU. There's also a tricky stretch where they go to Missouri State, then another road trip on a short week to Delaware. I understand that they are FCS newcomers, but I think they're going to present some difficult challenges, some unique challenges, and travel. This is something that you specialize in, Duck, in terms of looking for those sticky spots where, you may not have as much rest as your opponent. You may be traveling, putting a lot of air miles. This is an airplane league. So Western Kentucky having to go to some of these teams on the road, I think could be an interesting spot to fade them. That's it for me. Just big points. Maverick sound drops throughout the entire season. I'm excited for what Western's going to be, and I think they're going to be a really good and interesting team at the top of this conference. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do too. It's really staggering for Tyson Helton in his 7th year at the helm here at Western Kentucky, and the lack of continuity in the offensive coordinator position is now this is the 5th year in a row they've had a new OC in the system. We've seen this before with Western Kentucky, where they bring in an up-and-coming emerging offensive coordinator with his quarterback, and it worked out very well with Bailey Zappi, which was certainly a fan favorite on this program 4 years ago, and the legacy of Bailey Zappi continues to live on now. But I think that you hit Western Kentucky really right on the head. The offense is going to be projected to be very electric. I think that it helps MacGyver to know that there's familiarity in the system. He has a good relationship with the offensive coordinator. I really liked what he had to say during Conference USA Media Days about feeling very comfortable, even with the level up in competition. He feels good with the new room of receivers that he's working with. And I think that the offense is going to be just fine. We should see a little bit more tempo from this group this year with Western Kentucky. The offensive line is really the question mark with all the transfers. With a full rebuild, they've got transfers from Kent State, Bowling Green, Akron, New Mexico all coming in. And we'll know right away if this unit gels. But with the nature of the offense and MacGyver getting the ball out of his hands quickly, I think that'll mitigate any sort of worry about pressure being provided. I think that they'll be locked in with what they want to do offensively. The handcuff with this group is really just the defense. There's a lack of returning production on the defense. There's a lack of only 3 starters that come back. And it was really stunning to dive into the metrics last year and see how this defensive front seven wore down against the run. I mean, it was just really, really bad when you dive into giving up 250 to 300 rushing yards per game against teams like Louisiana Tech, New Mexico State. I faced Jacksonville State, which was a dynamic rushing attack, but there was just no stopping the run, and it was just one of the things that really caused problems for Western Kentucky, and I don't see it getting a lot better. I don't see any reason to suspect that with who they have returning in the front seven, that they'll immediately have those changes fixed. And for that reason, we had talked about high-scoring affairs with Western Kentucky, and I think that the defense will kind of be the Achilles heel for this team this season, the Hilltoppers, and I like to hone in on their overs. You and I have already bet their over in the Week 0 conference matchup versus Sam Houston State. Now, concomitant to what Sam Houston State wants to do, we'll get into that a little later on in the program, but high-flying affairs are what we should see. The win total, I think, is appropriately priced. You mentioned a couple of tough road trips at Toledo and at LSU, which I do think are fade spots for Western Kentucky. They've also got to go to Missouri State. Missouri State head coach Ryan Beard has a fairly close relationship and family ties to Western Kentucky, and they're a very motivated group to get that win at home. They've got to go to Louisiana Tech. So I think that I would lean over the 7.5, but I don't think that there's a tremendous amount of value, just given the fact that there's probably a couple of losses in non-conference play. I think Western Kentucky, there's about 4 or 5 teams that are kind of competing for that second spot in Conference USA behind Liberty, and I definitely think Western Kentucky is one of those teams, and should be a real exciting season and electrifying offensive season for this Western Kentucky group here in Bowling Green, Kentucky this year.
All right, next up, I'm going to zig a little bit here and go to a team that's further down the board in terms of their odds to win Conference USA, but I think they're mispriced, and this is why you're listening to the show. You're trying to grab the value that's still on the board, a lot of movement throughout this offseason. But at 13-1, give me the UTEP Miners. 3-9 last season, 3-5 in conference play in Scotty Walton's first season after great success at Austin Peay. Win total set at 5.5, 7 returning starters, 4 on offense, 3 on defense, 43rd in returning production overall, 10th offensively. Walden will continue to call plays, but Mark Calla arrives from TCU to coordinate this offense. Bobby Daly comes in from Montana State to coach up this defense. His Bobcat defense was fantastic last year, 11th in scoring D, despite playing an FBS opponent and 7 ranked FCS foes. So not everything is made, created equal at the FCS level, but they certainly had a challenging slate, and they were able to elevate their play throughout the entire season. He has returning starters at all 3 levels of this defense, but they'll need someone to pop out of the portal, particularly in the trenches, because pressure was their calling card last season. Assad Hall from South Carolina State could be that breakout candidate after making all MEAC last year. They have depth here, but they need a game changer, so we'll see if that materializes. Offensively, they have some really nice weapons. They got Hashawn Wilson from Charlotte at running back. They got Cam Thomas in that minor back role, and they also have Kenny Odom, who averaged over 16 yards per reception last fall. But who plays quarterback? We'll get to that in just a moment. As I mentioned, year 2 is when I was targeting Scotty. I know they're going to take their lumps. They're, a huge philosophical change in terms of tempo, in terms of, the formations they were putting out there, the pressure they were putting on their quarterback, as opposed to the previous regime that wanted to shrink games down and play ground and pound. They got smacked around last year. Let's just call it what it was. They lost so many of their first games going away, but then they closed 3-3, and 2 of those losses were by 1 possession. So they were not all that far away from being middle class in Conference USA, if not a team that was kind of knocking on the door. They've added back-to-back recruiting classes that have been the best in school history. All this high school recruiting, I think, is going to start bubbling up, and those 3-star recruits that they got in the portal, all of a sudden those replacements and some of the players they lost, as I mentioned, 8 new defensive starters, almost all of these guys are 3-stars. So the talent is so much better than it was in 2023 when they had a coaching shakeup. Then there's the schedule. You got Tennessee Martin, shout out to the Skyhawks, both newcomers in Mo State and Delaware, New Mexico State, Jack State, Louisiana Monroe, and La Tech at home. To me, that's 7 winnable games right there. The only surefire loss is down on the 40 acres against Texas. Winnable roadies at Sam Houston and Kennesaw, certainly. They even get Liberty at home. So I love this schedule, particularly for their win total, 5.5. I think they're going to get to bowl eligibility. I think they're mispriced in this market at 13-1. If I was pricing it myself at one of these books, I would put them in the single digits, probably 8 or 9-1. It may not seem like a huge difference, but I think in a conference where it's just begging for that second cut of teams below Liberty and Western to elevate themselves, I think UTEP should be front of the line there. Sam Houston and Jacksonville State, for example, they have shorter odds. I don't see that. I think it's silly based on what UTEP has offensively and the potential upside. Skylar Locklear, here's the question. Is it going to be him? Is it going to be Malachi Nelson? Who finally seizes this job? Nelson's brought in, a former 5-star, 4-star recruit, depending on the service. He didn't win the job in Boise. And, there's some questions about his health going into last offseason. When is this guy going to show up? And if he doesn't, can they still elevate offensively and play the kind of football they're playing down the stretch, carry that over into the season with Locklear? I have my concerns about the offensive line. This is the only wet blanket I'm going to throw on Miner Nation here. One returning starter from a unit that finished 99th in line yards and 101st in pass blocking per PFF. But I'm in on this over. I'm going to sprinkle on the CUSA title as well. This was a league where, I nailed Jacksonville State last year. I think there's always value in teams not at the very top of the board because from a talent perspective, UTEP's going to be pretty close to Western Kentucky, certainly. And I think that's going to be the main competition to get into the title game out, to play Liberty. So I'll go ahead with the Miners. What are your thoughts on Scotty Walden and what he's building out there in West Texas?
Well, Scotty Walden is a great coach for this program. He's a real motivator. He's a high intensity and high energy coach, and he lives and breathes UTEP football. And that's absolutely what this program needs, a real shot of adrenaline in the arm to kind of reinvigorate this once proud group. And this fan base is dying for a winning El Paso football team. And I think he's the guy that's eventually going to get it done there. Last year, we saw their offense take some lumps. It was a complete 180 shift from what Dana Dima wanted to do with kind of a rhino package and double tight end and power football. And now you're running this new unique offense that Scotty Walden brings in from Austin Peay. And they really kind of did take their licks last season. Now, the quarterback play unlocks a lot in this offense, and it'll be really interesting to see the development of Skylar Locklear and see if he can really take that next step. He got hurt last year, and they rotated 3 or 4 quarterbacks. My goodness, at one point they were even down to J.P. Pickles starting at quarterback, so it just did not really go the way that they wanted offensively last season. And the addition of Malachi Nelson adds in a different element as well. And I think the reports out of camp are that he's not in contention or he's not leading the competition to be the number one. So certainly hope that doesn't create a locker room rift. But offensively in the skill room, I think UTEP is just loaded with talent. I love Hassan Wilson, who comes in from Charlotte. I think the receiver room is loaded with players that are just set to explode. And the offensive line is a question, but the offensive line has really good size. They really feel comfortable with the transfers that they have, and they feel that this group is going to gel really quickly with the UTEP offensive line. So I think we'll see a major step forward for UTEP offensively this season. Defensively, this group was really quietly good at a lot of things that you want to be good at. They were a pretty decent third down defense. They bowed up pretty well in the red zone, forcing 9 empty possessions and 8 red zone field goals. And then you talked about the defensive havoc metrics, 87 tackles for loss and 36 sacks. This was a front 7 that got after it. Now, the real question defensively is, can they get these transfers up to speed and get them in position to replicate that success? I'm glad you didn't mention the name because I will. The guy who's going to anchor this defense is Micah Davey, who comes in from McNeese State and had 311 tackles in 3 years at FCS. This guy is absolutely a stud and will fit right in with what UTEP is wanting to do with their alignment. He will certainly have his mark on how this season goes for UTEP. Defensively, I think you just need a little bit of marginal incremental gain in improvement and getting that back end of the secondary shored up. And I think this group could actually be okay this season. I think that the UTEP defensive alignment will be all right, and they should certainly be one of those teams. I kind of mentioned it before, but I think there's about 5 or 6 teams that are poised to kind of jockey for position for that second level in Conference USA, and UTEP is certainly one of them. with the schedule, over 5.5 definitely seems not out of the question at all. There's a team that's going to have a lot of shots on goal. I count 10 winnable games, if I'm being honest with you, and I think that you've got a great start in the non-conference with a trip to Logan, Utah, and that's certainly going to be a winnable game with Utah State in defensive disarray, and we'll see how that goes in Bronco Mendenhall's first season up there. Louisiana Monroe will be a challenge, but certainly not unwinnable, hosting that game in the Sun Bowl. Conference foes, Louisiana Tech, Sam Houston, Kennesaw State, a descending Jacksonville State team. New Mexico State in the I-10 rivalry is winnable, and then the two newcomers in Missouri State and Delaware are certainly winnable. So I think that a very successful season for UTEP would be to go 6-6 and make a bowl game and give those fans something to be excited about. But it would not surprise me at all if the Miners end up at 7 or 8 wins this season, if things absolutely hit home runs offensively and if the defense shows marginal improvement.
All right, let's keep the train rolling to another team that's, well, they actually don't have odds to win Conference USA because they are not eligible yet. They're going to have to do the James Madison experience where no matter how well you play early on, you just got to pound your fist on the table and just wait your turn. That, of course, is the Delaware Fightin' Blue Hens. UDEL joins Michigan as the only FBS program to wear the winged helmet. The Fightin' Blue Hens design originated in 1951 when former Michigan football player David M. Nelson took over as head coach. Shout out to Steve Helwich from Underdog Dynasty for that nugget. Now, Delaware is prepared because they are one of the best FCS programs in terms of consistently winning. They're not going to come in trying to figure out how to be a winning program, how to have an off-season program, how to do things in the locker room. This is a team that expects to win. They went 9-2 last season overall, 6-2 in CAA. Their win total is set at a modest 4.5. They have 12 returning starters, 5 on offense, 7 on defense, 20th in returning production nationwide, 4th defensively. And I think that's what's going to be able to keep them in games as they get their feet wet offensively at the FBS level. Ryan Carty had an incredible mentor in Casey Keeler. He's someone that we've loved here at BBOC. We wish him luck now leading the Temple program. But his mentor has prepared him, and it really shows. He's 26-11 in his young career, leading UDEL to back-to-back FCS playoff appearances when eligible. Manny Rojas is his defensive coordinator, and he's a really good one. Top 25 in scoring and total defense, solid Havoc numbers, and he's working with a secondary that's nearly fully intact. They use 3 safeties as a part of a 3-3-5 look, so to have that experience there, they're not going to have a lot of blown coverages, not going to give up a lot of explosive plays in year one at the FBS level. Noah Matthews arrives from Kentucky, could be a force off the edge. He's someone that they were very fortunate to get through the transfer portal. This could easily be a top 4 defense in Conference USA from day one. It's going to require a few things to work up front for them, but in terms of, as I said, not having those big plays, those explosive plays work against them, having their secondary basically be firefighters, keep everything in front of them, keep those explosive plays at bay. I think that's going to give them a puncher's chance in the league every single week once we get into Conference USA play. Offensively, though, there's obviously some moving parts here and not in a good way. They lose Marcus Yarns, who's trying to secure a roster spot with the New Orleans Saints. He pumped in 29 TDs in the past 2 seasons. That's a lot of production to replace. The staff is high on Jonathan Silver, though, and the receiving core returns a lot of contributors, but no clear top dog, wide receiver 1. So when you look at the rest of this offense, you got to start with the offensive line, which does return 3 starters, and they added some depth in the portal, but quarterback play remains a bit of a mystery. Will it be Nick Minicucci or Zach Marker? Who knows at this point? I think it's going to be an extended fall camp competition. Nick played at a big program in New Jersey, Don Bosco, popped up last year into the starting role, had 13 total touchdowns in 4 starts down the stretch. But just like Marker, they had some injury issues at times in their career, but he did show some dual threat potential. Marker on the other side can't really run, but he did throw 10 touchdowns last season without a single interception, although he has problems with sacks. So I think this is going to be a question philosophically for Carty and his staff. Do you want to go someone with the higher upside with Minicucci, who can move around, who can make plays happen when the pocket breaks down, or do you want to go with a very accurate passer who needs a clean pocket? They both seem like they could be above average Conference USA starters if the line performs to expectations, but they're also going to need someone to emerge on the perimeter as a go-to weapon. Depending on how this season shakes out, I could see them being favored in 4 home games. You got Delaware State against the Hornets, Middle Tennessee, La Tech, and UTEP, depending on what shape the Miners are when they come to Newark. Surefire losses at Colorado, at Liberty, but the rest of the slate could get really interesting. I think this is going to be a team that you don't want to make your mind up as a gambler early on because of the transition, because of the quarterback questions. I think they could kind of be a high variance team throughout the season. Could they win on the road at FIU, Jack State, Sam Houston, or maybe even a completely rebuilding Wake? I don't think it's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I lean over the 4.5, no official play out of me here, but their starting 22 has the makings, in my opinion, more of a 5-7 team this year than a 2-10. We'll call it a year 0 squad. So I'm going to go ahead, no official play. I think the Blue Hens are well positioned to be borderline knocking on the door middle class Conference USA here in year 1. What are your thoughts on UDEL?
I think they are poised to have success. It's a really proud program. It's a program that's excited about this jump, and it's a group that really plays hard-nosed effort football week in and week out, and that's been their calling card at FCS for a long time. And so I think that this Delaware team is poised to have a successful first year in Conference USA. Now we'll have to really define what that looks like. I look to play Delaware early in the season. To just touch on a couple of things you said, the quarterback position last season was just riddled with injuries. Both Zach Marker and Miniucci were hurt, and they actually even had to rely on Braden Streeter to start one game for Delaware last season. So as long as the quarterback position can remain one that is healthy and free of injury, I think that they'll compete well in Conference USA action. I look for Ellison in the running back room to have a pretty decent season so long as the offensive line can get shored up. They've got 3 starters back from last year's offensive line, and they've got 2 reserves that have kind of grown up in the program that they're now just asking to step up and do a bigger role with the team. And so I think offensive line play will you could say this about any team, but offensive line play would really be something to watch. Defensively, I think that the front 7 is undersized. I think that they're fast and they have some speed, but they are undersized, and I do worry about depth late in the season where a lot of their winnable games are, so we'll be real interested to chart Delaware and see how the depth holds up. It's easy to suspect that maybe it doesn't, but we'll see. I think that they're really soundly coached. I think that they can execute well and be in positions to where they can see several wins. I definitely think it'll be interesting. If you look at Delaware and Delaware State, not nearly on the same playing level. They should blast the Hornets, who play in the FCS MEAC, and they're just a real bottom feeder program and not very competitive. So Delaware should certainly start their season off there. And I'm real interested to see what this line's going to be when they go out to Boulder for a national TV game. I could see them catching 20 points or more, and I'm real interested to see them in their real first premier national TV spot and how that program performs in Boulder at elevation. Then they come back and double back for a Northeast rivalry contest against University of Connecticut before they have to go to Miami. And I think that Miami spot, or at FIU, could be possibly a little downer spot. I think they might be looking for the bye after week 4. So I don't know necessarily if that'll be their best effort. But then in the middle of the schedule for Delaware, you have 25 days where you only play one game. You get the bye, and then you get a Western Kentucky team that you host. Then you get another bye, and then it's at Jack State on October 15th, and then you continue the last 7 games of the season. So depending on what I see from this defensive group and their depth and how they've performed, there could be some spots where this team could be looking at securing some wins late in the season, particularly Louisiana Tech, Sam Houston State, and then that last game of the season, specifically if UTEP has already secured bowl eligibility, there's really not a lot that I can see the Miners showing up for in that last game, but this will be Delaware's Super Bowl game with their last game of the season on senior day at home with no bowl game in sight, so I could definitely see a real spirited effort out of Delaware there. And another spot that I'm interested to see how this will go for Delaware is when they travel to Winston-Salem in their second to last game of the season to play Wake Forest. Jake Dickert takes over for Wake Forest, and we've seen his Washington State teams really fade late in the season the last couple of years, and so it could be a great spot to back Delaware against the number against a fading, descending potentially Wake Forest team late in the year. It's another spot for Delaware to step up in competition. So we'll have to circle back to those later on. But I think there's a couple of really good spots to back Delaware against the number, and I could definitely see this group at 5 wins.
From Delaware to a team that has a lot of swag and certainly on this program is going to have a lot of sound drops. Mr. Worldwide, Pitbull himself being the proud backer of this program. The stadium's named after him. Let's talk FIU. The Panthers 4-8 last season, 3-5 in conference play. That was enough to clean house, get themselves a new coach. They are 14-1 to win the conference this year. Their win total set at 5.5. They have 3 starters returning, 2 on offense, 1 on defense. Critically, their quarterback, Kewan Jenkins, 102nd in returning production overall, 98th on both sides of the ball. Let me say this straight away. This is the kind of hire that FIU needed to make. Willie Simmons won at Prairie View A&M. Then he won huge at Florida A&M, leading them to an HBCU national title. His 2023 season was so special that the Rattlers finished 5th in the FCS coaches poll, the best finish by an HBCU in the FCS era. Winning at these places means 2 things. You can evaluate talent and you can recruit your butt off because you don't have the money to compete with the big boys. You can't miss when you have an opportunity and get into these recruiting wars. But also, you need to be able to coach up who you have on hands. You can't just go into the portal and buy talent. So Willie comes into a program like this that needs to do more with less. I think he's the perfect guy. He earned a reputation in the state of Florida already with all the high school coaches as an elite recruiter, somebody who knows every single high school, every single coach. He's a player's coach. He relates to these kids. Even like a little tidbit, he's a huge sneakerhead. He's got like 400 pairs of sneakers. He's well dressed. He comes in, he commands a room. And as one of the rare African-American FBS head coaches, I think that gives him a leg up to be able to go into some of these predominantly Black communities and be able to offer something different. Because FIU is not just going to be able to drop off a bag. It has to be a bit cultural. It has to be a bit about him being a player coach relating to these kids. Oh, and also his incredibly stat-friendly system. In one off-season interview that I watched, he mentioned the word up-tempo 4 times in a single answer about his offensive philosophy. They want to go fast. They want to spread teams out. They want to be multiple in terms of their formations, their personnels out of the shotgun, which is fitting because his nickname in high school was Shotgun Simmons. He played at Clemson. He played at the Citadel. He is somebody who is really easy to like. If you haven't listened to this guy or you're not familiar with him, he's going to be a darling in the G5, or at least I hope so. But do they have the horses in 2024? All of this is great. All this positivity is great. Maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Maybe I'm getting ahead of my skis a little bit here with them coming off a 4-win season. But when I look at it, they bring back Kewan Jenkins, a.k.a. Lights Out. He just needs to turn up the big plays and turn down the turnover-worthy plays because he's always been a little bit of good, a little bit of bad, most of the time in the same game. Last year, 19 big-time throws per PFF, but also 15 turnover-worthy plays as well. The good news is he was absolutely cooking late, and in terms of his overall confidence, he was someone who won big at the high school level. And when you look at what he did down the stretch last season, 12 touchdowns, a single interception in his final 4 games, 3 of which he avoided taking a sack as well. So it wasn't just the turnover-worthy plays, it was also any negative plays. If he can keep them ahead of the sticks, I think that's the name of the game in year 1 of Simmons' offense. Looking at the rest of the talent around him, Keyjon Owens, returns at running back, as well as 3 of his top 4 wide receivers. I mean, losing Rivers, it's not great. Goes to Georgia Tech. I would be more bullish on this receiving room if he was back, but those are the breaks at the G5 level. They added 6'6" Alex Perry from Hawaii, who I think is an interesting big target, could be a safety blanket for Jenkins this year. and three-star linemen from Middle Tennessee, UAB, and Miami, Florida. I think there's a chance, given the pieces, that they're going to be, borderline fifth or sixth best offense in Conference USA. And if they do that, I think the transfers could be enough on the defensive side of the ball. They're counting on at least 5 transfers to make an impact and be starters. All of them were 3-star guys from programs like Colorado, Florida State, and Illinois. Purely starting 11, I think they could have a really good secondary that's going to be difficult to throw on. Can they generate a pass rush, though? Obviously, it's interconnected in terms of your overall pass defense numbers. You got to be able to get to the quarterback, but they got not one but 2 FSU edge rushers who came through the portal, so that gives them a shot right away. Now, you've broken down the schedule beautifully for the first couple teams we've discussed here in the CUSA. They get a win over Bethune-Cookman. They take a paycheck loss to Penn State early on. They likely lose to UConn and Liberty. But then after that, in my opinion, every single game is winnable. I think this total is spot on. I think schedule-wise, I don't necessarily love how things break situationally, like catching Jacksonville State and Sam Houston to end the year. I prefer to play those teams early in their transition to new coaching staff and new philosophies. If they played them in September, I think at this point I'd chalk them up as wins. But right now you're giving these teams time to grow, so we'll see if that goes off more as a coin flip game down the stretch. I think in the end, I'm going to back them situationally. Like, they have a lot of juice, not just with a first-year coach, but they bring a lot in from the community perspective. They got Hispanic Heritage Night at Pitbull Stadium, where they're in the Biscayne blue uniforms against Delaware. It's going to be a wild scene when they wear their Miami Vice uniforms. When they host Kennesaw, they're going to have that like speedboat yacht in the end zone. This is the kind of stuff that you need to do at the G5 level to be able to drum up some excitement for the program. I think it's going to help. They're going to have more swag, certainly, than any team in the conference. Will that translate to wins? I'm not putting my money behind it at 5.5. As I said, the number I think is just right. 14-1 doesn't move the needle for me from a conference future perspective. But situationally, I think this offense could work if Jenkins gets cooking early. And this offense, as I said, is stat friendly. There could be some overs to consider as well. But I'm just excited to see Willie Simmons settle in as an FBS head coach, because he certainly deserves it.
Yeah, staggering similarities in my notes. And we've got a great loyal following here at BBOC, and I love the traction that our G5 deep dives have seen grow over the years. We don't compare notes, and this is a real interesting case study for FIU, but my sentiments on the Panthers are very, very similar. I think this team has the potential to be a real feisty out this year in Conference USA. We talked about Lights Out Jenkins coming back for year 3 in the program, and I thought that he showed some significant flashes of brilliance last season. Willie Simmons is just an absolute slam dunk hire for this program. He's a real players coach and a coach that is able to connect with the group of guys that he has in the locker room, something the previous regime was really unable to do. They will probably deploy a running back by committee approach this season with Keyshawn Owens and Devontae Lyons splitting carries, and then we'll see Anthony Carey get a few carries as well in a spell role.
Yeah, Anthony Carey coming from Georgia Tech, he's kind of, I wouldn't say a mystery. I think they just aren't necessarily counting on him to be the bell cow back. But if he were to pop, that wouldn't surprise me at all, which would put a lot of wind in their sails offensively.
It really would. And I'm glad you mentioned Alex Perry from Hawaii. He's a great receiver get. And with what they lost in the receiver room last year, I think that this kind of mitigates those losses. Offensive line is a concern, as almost all these teams have had. You're transitioning, you're plugging some guys in from FCS, you're looking for people to fill in some big holes. I like the fact that they have Julius Pierce, who was at the program, left and has now come back. Looks like 3 sophomores are possibly going to be expected to start, and so some of those players have at least some game reps, so not a completely green unit there. Defensively, there's actually some things to like for FIU. The DC was retained and is in his 4th year, and so there's going to be some continuity on the defense. Last year in third down defense, 55 of 171, 32%. This team did really well at getting off the field on third down, and they were really able to bow up in the red zone quite nicely. There was a lot of empty possessions, 10 empty possessions and 10 times where opponents had to settle for red zone field goals. So it was only a touchdown about a little over half the time that you got into the red zone with FIU. And so they actually had a little bit more intestinal fortitude than what you might think. I think the secondary has a chance to be really special. They have three really consistent players in the secondary. They think Brian Blades is an NFL-type defensive player, and I think that they will be okay against the pass this season, and they're going to have to be with some of those passing offenses that we've talked about coming into Conference USA or changing schemes. There's really not a tremendous amount of bad, and so I think the floor for FIU is probably higher than what many people might think with the Panthers this season. The key games that are going to make or break their season are going to be at rival FAU. It's not gone well for the Panthers over the last 7 meetings with FAU, but this could possibly be one of those games where maybe they steal a win there at FAU. I think it'll be critical to see how they start their season against Delaware in conference play. It'll be real interesting in a revenge spot to see how they play against Kennesaw State in the middle of their schedule. They get to host Jacksonville State at the end of their schedule. They go to Sam Houston. They go to Middle Tennessee. So there is certainly plenty of winnable games on the slate. I think the win total is appropriately priced, but it would not surprise me at all if this team were to go bowling this season. I just look at some of the results from last season that were losses. Had a close loss against a strong FCS Monmouth team. They had a really close loss against Liberty, which went to overtime. They had a real close bout with Jacksonville State, and then they lost by 1 point against Kennesaw State. If the breaks go their way and they're 8-4, what's the narrative on this FIU Panther team this season? They're probably the narrative is that they're vying for a Conference USA title. So I think this has a potential to be a real feisty out this year in the Panthers, and I think FIU will have a good season.
Football season is here, folks, and we've got some huge improvements and updates coming on the award-winning Action Network app, which we're very excited to discuss in the weeks ahead. But to get the most out of the app, you still need to be an Action Pro subscriber. It's only with Action Pro you get real-time pick alerts from me, Duck, Stucky, and Colin, and the entire Action Network team of experts. Plus, you can get access to pro projections powered by Sean Kerner and our predictive analytics team, plus a million other benefits. And right now, BBOC listeners can save $20 off the annual price of Action Pro. Just go to actionnetwork.com/pro and use promo code BBOC20. That's actionnetwork.com/pro. Use code BBOC20 for $20 off the annual price of Action Pro. We turn now to the other newcomer at the FBS level and here in Conference USA, the Missouri State Bears. They went 8-4 last season, 5-2 in their conference play. They nearly upset number 3 Montana at their place in the season opener. You don't just go in and knock the Grizzlies around on their home field. So a very impressive performance there. Their win total is set at 4.5. They also cannot win the conference title just like Delaware, so they can't even get to the title game. 10 returning starters, 7 on offense, 3 on defense, 17th in returning production nationally, 8th on offense. Question right off the top, could they have the best quarterback in the conference? Because they got the big kid, Jacob Clark, 6'5", 225 pounds, completed almost 70% of his passes last fall, 3,600 yards, 26 TDs, third in passing efficiency at the FCS level. Isaiah McMorris comes in from Nebraska, a former track star. He can stretch the defense. James Blackstrain came from Georgia Tech and made an instant impact. And Jamarie Robinson is a former FCS All-American. Dylan Hipp could be a breakout star at tight end. He's 6'6", 240 pounds, formerly of Ole Miss. Shamari Lawrence is an okay option in the backfield, but it's really an offensive line that needs to play better. I think that's the bugaboo for them. I think that is where they will sink or swim this year. They were a young offensive line last year that allowed a lot of hits on Clark. They returned 4 starters now. So when this pro-style offense is humming, he has time to operate their blocking efficiently, and Clark can pick teams apart down the field. They also have a reliable kicker returning who made 11 of his 12 attempts last year and hit a 50-yarder. Now, defense is where things could get shaky after key pieces walked out the door in the offseason. But luckily, I know you love a good FCS portal story. Jalen Brooks needs to come in and play like a man possessed, which he did last year at Campbell. He had 118 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss. He needs to play really well in the box because this line could get bullied, and the secondary is relying on new faces to slow down passing attacks that they're going to face. Speaking of which, USC and SMU in the first 3 weeks, and then they go to Western Kentucky on September 27th. just like with Delaware, just pump the brakes. Don't make up your mind just based on the statistical profile at the end of September, because it's going to be skewed in a really bad way in terms of their passing yards that they're giving up. Still, just like, some of the teams we've discussed, Western as one of them, this team screams over to me on a weekly basis because they're going to get bombed aerially. And that's what I want, frankly. I want some of these early Missouri State overs, lock them in early before the market catches up to them. And then I could see them turning a corner later in the season against a closing slate of Middle Tennessee, New Mexico State, FIU, Liberty, UTEP, Kennesaw, and La Tech. I could see a 1-4 turning into a 5-7 where they're feisty. And, all of a sudden they're starting to cover numbers, some backdoor covers, particularly with this offense and with Clark cooking. He's not someone who's going to give up on the season, because this entire year essentially is an audition for NFL talent evaluators and where he wants to stack up in the NFL draft come next spring. So my closing thoughts here are: do not sell early on Ryan Beard and the Bears, and thank me later. What are your thoughts on Mo State?
Great quarterback, Jacob Clark, who's been in the system for some time. He has great size. He's poised in the pocket when he has time to throw. And I think that this will be a really fun offense that'll have success against Conference USA defenses this season. Really what the catalyst will be is how the offensive line shores up, because this was a unit last year that struggled badly. They allowed 40 sacks. They allowed 84 tackles for loss. At times, this offensive line struggled to open up holes in the run game. And so if the offensive line is humming, this offense will be electrifying week in and week out, and they should put up some big numbers. I actually really, really like the addition of Shamari Lawrence in the running back room. He started his career at the University of South Dakota and was an electrifying back for them before going to FIU, and is now here in Springfield. And I think he'll fit right in the running back room there. Really what this season will come down to, because this is a transition year. This is a year that this program is going to experience a lot of firsts. I think the coaching staff is fairly prepared for it with the group that's in their locker room. I think the defense is at times going to just get exposed, because we have just seen it when they've played up in competition at the FCS level, specifically against the premier FCS Missouri Valley Football Conference teams in South Dakota State and North Dakota State and the University of South Dakota. They have just struggled badly to get off the field. They can't stop the run, and teams score very consistently against this defensive unit. At all three levels of the defense, I think there are holes. 11 of the top 13 tacklers are gone, and you just look at the transfers that are brought in along the defensive line and in the linebacker room. It could work out. There are some guys that you had mentioned, Jalen Brooks specifically, who started his career at UNC before going to Campbell and is now here. It's kind of a revival story in his career that could happen. Some of the secondary guys are inexperienced, but they've kind of bounced around a little bit, so it'll be really interesting to see how this defensive alignment can gel together. We'll know a little bit about this team after they go to the Coliseum and face USC, but then they'll have a couple of games that I think are winnable. I think they'll find it a lot easier when they've got to go to Marshall. We'll talk Marshall later on in the offseason here, but I don't think that that'll be something that's unwinnable. I know that this group will be really poised and motivated to host ACC foe SMU in week 3, so that'll be a real interesting spot for Missouri State when you're looking at against the spread wagering week to week. Then they'll host FCS UT Martin. But you're absolutely right. Later on in the schedule, there are some winnable situations with Kennesaw State. They host Louisiana Tech. They host FIU, which could be a coin flip game. New Mexico State. There are opportunities that present themselves for wins. One thing that I will say is their last game of the season, a couple days after Thanksgiving, they host Louisiana Tech. And if Louisiana Tech has either secured their 6th win to unlock bowl eligibility, or if that season goes awry in Ruston, which I believe it may, and they're not even playing for bowl game aspirations, that could be an absolutely brutal spot for Louisiana Tech, and one that I have circled in red ink to look to play Missouri State in their season finale. So there are a couple spots this year where Missouri State could be against the spread gold in your week-to-week wagering. And it's an offense that's not going to stop throwing the football. So even if you get outside of a big number, you're always going to have an opportunity to punch one in late to get the cover. So I like Missouri State against the number. I don't have a strong opinion on the win total, but this is going to be a really solid offensive group that's not going to be intimidated. Quarterback play should be just fine in this league. It'll come down to if the defense can get some stops, which to be determined.
From a newcomer to a former newcomer, Jacksonville State, they went 9-5 last year in Conference USA, 7-1 in Conference USA play. Obviously won the whole thing, lost their bowl game by 3 to Ohio in the Cure Bowl. But the headline here is bye-bye Rich Rod, hello Charles Kelly, who returns to Jacksonville State after being their OC in 96 and then turned around and was their DC in 97 and 98. That is something I've never seen at the high level of college football. But he's never been a head football coach at any level. So I have major questions about why this number to win the conference, 11-1, forget that, I'm not playing it. The win total is at 6.5. I'm just going to say it straight away, under, because they returned just 6 starters, 4 on offense, 2 on defense, 133rd in returning production, dead last in defensive production returning in the entire country. And not only is this, no longer Rich Rod's program, it's not Rich Rod's offense. We got a major scheme change here. The spread option is turning to Clint Trickett's spread, which will still feature a running quarterback at times, but he prefers a bell cow like he found at Marshall out of the backfield in Lamborghini Leyburn or Rasheen Ali. And frankly, his quarterbacks, when he's been a play caller in OC, have stunk. Cam Fancher was a 1-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio kind of guy. And when he was the passing game coordinator at Georgia Southern last year, J.C. French struggled mightily with turnovers. He served up 20 turnover-worthy plays. Now, Gavin Wimsett is likely your starter. He's got 17 career passing touchdowns, but 21 picks. He can absolutely run the ball. He's going to be a red zone demon. If he plays all 12 games, I could see him go for double-digit rushing touchdowns in those goal-to-go situations. But turnovers are going to hurt extra because this defense is going to be just porous across the board. And I think teams are going to be able to run it up in some revenge spots against the Gamecocks after all the success that they had in 2024. As I mentioned, the defense has no one left, and they may grade out well by Conference USA standards up front, but the back 8 is where my major concerns are. This defense is going to get shredded. They have no continuity, and they're coached up by Brian Williams, whose defenses at Maryland went from okay, decent to awful by the time he was run out of town. They consistently fell short in generating negative plays and taking the ball away with the Terps. That's not going to cut it with this schedule. First 3 weeks at UCF, Liberty, at Georgia Southern. They could get humbled early on, and then the schedule really does soften, but you wonder how many lumps they're going to take in those first 3 games. They're at Sam Houston, home against Delaware, at Middle Tennessee, at UTEP, Kennesaw, at FIU over a 7-week stretch. So as down as I am on this team, and I am playing their under on 6.5, I think I could just see the schedule where they could reel off 4 or 5 wins in the back half of the schedule and make it you sweat it out a little bit. Some of these unders that I like, and I'm going to talk about across the G5 landscape, sometimes I even like the alternate unders. This is not one of those cases. I don't see them getting to 7 wins based on what they have defensively. But as I mentioned, this schedule sets up for a nice little run in the middle of the year. And with Murray State as a gimme, I really need their spirit to be broken early. I just see a brand new head coach, an underwhelming journeyman quarterback, a meh play caller, no familiarity on defense, and comments like the one published in Athlon by an anonymous Conference USA assistant. Jacksonville State could be a first to worst or close candidate. I agree with that guy. Put your name to it, first of all, but I agree with him. I think this is going to be a team that could potentially go first to worst. And JSU, I just don't see it. Maybe you could talk into some positivity or some spots to play them, but offensively, I'm just not seeing it with Trickett at the helm.
No, I really can't. I mean, if you look at some of the returning production metrics, they were absolutely dead last in FBS football overall in returning production and production lost. And it just is going to be an uphill battle. The defense is one that is likely to get shredded week in and week out. The losses in production defensively are massive, and it was already a defense that we saw had some holes particularly in their first 3 games last season when they were shredded by Coastal Carolina, Louisville, and Eastern Michigan. Before Tyler Huff was inserted and really grabbed the reins of the offense, this team was in major, major trouble. Now you have the scheme changes on both sides. You have a new staff. You have quarterback coming in. That's Gavin Wimsatt, who had marginal success at Rutgers and not very much over at Kentucky before now landing here. I just don't see really a ton to really get excited about offensively with Jacksonville State this season. And I think the schedule provides actually some significant challenges. We talk about the non-conference with Central Florida, Liberty, going to Georgia Southern, which will be a strong Sun Belt team this season. And then after the gimme game against a weak FCS opponent in Murray State, they've got to go to Southern Miss. That's kind of one of those swing games for Southern Miss where maybe people thought that was going to be a loss, but you and I knew early in that Southern Miss offseason that that's one that they'll certainly have circled to get in the win column, and a much improved Southern Miss team. So I totally see a 1-4 start here. And there could be some plausibility that you could drum up a few wins in the conference slate, but I think going to UTEP on back-to-backs with Middle Tennessee and UTEP in the middle of that schedule is going to be really tough. Hosting Western Kentucky, who will be on revenge for losing the CUSA championship game last season, in a team that will have their own holes defensively, but still a much improved offense and will probably have much more to play for at that point in the season. Going to FIU will be no cakewalk. I mean, I think there's still room to go here. I think Jacksonville State is poised to take a significant step back. When you look at the electrifying offense that we saw from this team last season and piling up the rushing yards, scoring 40 or 50 or even 60 points in conference play, throw all that out the window. It's going to look a lot different here in Jacksonville, Alabama this season for Jacksonville State. They will not have as much punch offensively. The defense is going to be leaky at all 3 levels. It's under all the way. Under 6.5 was a regular season win play that I made. I don't like anything for this team as far as a conference future. I just don't see it here in this first year. And frankly, I really think they just kind of settled at head coach. I know that they like the fact that he had recruiting ties to the area, but I'm not in love with the hire of Charles Kelly. It may work out, it may not work out, but I definitely don't see a tremendous amount of success here in year 1 for Jacksonville State. I've got him at 4-8.
It would be my favorite under of a 6.5 across the entire board if it wasn't for the next team on our list. Louisiana Tech, the Bulldogs, 5-8 last year, 4-4. They did get to go to a bowl game when Marshall backed out of the Independence Bowl, and they got smacked around by Army for the effort, losing 27-6. They're plus 850 to win Conference USA. That's a pass for me. As I mentioned, the 6.5 on the win total. It's my favorite under here in the CUSA. 8 returning starters, 5 on offense, 3 on defense, 93rd in returning production, overall 102nd defensively. Sonny Cumbie was on the chopping block after a 3-6 start to last season. He's got 2 years remaining on his 5-year deal, and if La Tech axed him, they'd owe him 75% of what's left, which obviously is pretty small if they fire him after the season. Why do I hate La Tech? Maybe it's the millennial in me, but this was once a fun offensive program. The Tim Rattay, Troy Edwards, Colby Camerons that came through Ruston. Sonny Dykes was coaching this team 10 years before he coached in a national title game. The players, the coaches, the offense, it all had juice. Under Cumbie, this offense has gotten worse every single year. It bottomed out last fall, scoring less than 3 touchdowns per game, 111th in total offense. And the very first thing you're going to read, because it's the job of the writers in these preview magazines, where's the silver lining? Where's the hope? You're going to hear about Evan Bullock. He protected the football last year as a freshman, which is a great thing. But I call this the Neil O'Donnell effect. My late father and I used to hate Neil O'Donnell, quarterback for the Steelers and the Jets, because he would always get his butt kissed by announcers saying, the guy doesn't turn the ball over. He never had a double-digit interception season, despite being a full-time starter for most of the 90s. What was his secret? He just ate the football. Every single time that there was pressure or a tight window, just take the sack. He got sacked 45 times in 15 games in 1997. He was simply afraid to throw under pressure. That's the Evan Bullock experience, at least what he put on tape as a freshman. He got sacked every 10 dropbacks for La Tech last fall. That was the secret to not throwing picks. That was the second highest sack rate of any full-time starter in FBS behind Jackson Arnold, who was constantly under attack in Norman with that Oklahoma offensive line in shambles last year. So the question is, did La Tech's offensive line get any better? They returned 2 starters up front, but they're going to likely rely on 2 sophomores, Roy Brackens III and Keystone Allison at the guard spots. Allison is brand new. Bracken saw limited action, and they lost a potential starter to Wake Forest late in the transfer portal when it opened up in late spring as their left tackle, who would have been a senior. He would have come in. He had 4 years on campus. That is another big loss. The receiving core is also super green. I got a bad feeling about this offense just being stuck in the mud for the majority of 2025. And this schedule has quality opponents kind of sprinkled throughout that I think is going to keep the Bulldogs from building any momentum. They're at LSU. They got a home game against Southern Miss in September. They got Wazoo and Liberty back to back late in this schedule. I just don't see it. And really, the only reason why they were competitive last year was defensive coordinator Jeremiah Johnson, who's off to Coastal. He did a bang-up job for La Tech. I think that's actually underselling it. I think given the talent on hand, it was one of the best coaching jobs in America last year. They were 12th in total defense, 25th in third down defense, top 25, 14th in red zone D. Just a tremendous situational play caller. When you saw them in pivotal moments when they needed to get off the field or they needed to hold teams to 3, they did it. And the offense was constantly putting them in bad positions, and they still delivered. The fall off to Luke Olson, the new DC, from a pure coaching perspective, I don't think it's going to be huge because he did a great job at Jacksonville State last year, but I see the personnel taking a big hit here. Their front 6 returns just 1 starter. They didn't address that adequately in the portal, in my opinion, so this could be problematic right from the jump. Lots to like in their secondary, but a lack of pass rush, as I mentioned earlier in this preview, has that ripple effect. So I'm going to go under here. I'm going to see, the losses to clearly LSU, Wazoo, Liberty. And then I just need 3 more from the home games against Southern Miss, Western, roadies against FBS newcomers, Delaware, Mo State, UTEP, Kennesaw. I see 5 and 7, if not 4 and 8, or as you mentioned, potentially the entire thing collapsing and a midseason firing. The coaches, are looking for new jobs. The players are looking to the portal early. They're on social media, basically putting their hand up, come save me from this sinking ship. I think this is the sinking ship for a team that is being priced as a middle-class potential fringe contender in Conference USA. I don't see that at all. I don't think their offense is going to take the step forward needed for the defense taking a step back. What are your thoughts on the boys from Ruston?
Seems like the boys from Ruston, this Louisiana Tech Bulldog platoon is one that's getting a lot of love in the preseason in Conference USA circles, and I don't understand why. You mentioned Jeremiah Johnson was an incredible defensive coordinator. You saw so many flashes of what he was able to do with that defense in the bowl game against Army, where the offense did absolutely nothing, continued to put the defense out there, and the defense really hung in there against Captain America and Army and made it really difficult for Army, really limiting what they kind of wanted to do. And that defensive line really showed up and showed out really all season for Louisiana Tech, but specifically in that bowl game. And he's off to Coastal Carolina, and the defensive production is lost. And I don't see how they're going to just be able to replace it. I think that people have undersold this coordinator move, but you and I have not. With the offense, we keep hearing all of this great, exquisite stuff about the Sonny Cumbie system, but 3 years into it with Louisiana Tech, and we just have not seen it. There's just so little for me to really want to get excited about. 39% on third down. There was way too many empty red zone possessions last season. They entered the red zone 48 times. 13 of those times they came away with absolutely 0 points, and then they settled for field goals 11 other times. So half the time you get into the red zone, you're scoring 3 or 0. It's just way too little output to try to assume that the offensive production can be reliable week in and week out, because it just simply wasn't. You look at the team rushing average was 2.9 yards per carry over the course of the entire season, and the offensive line, although it was fairly experienced last year, was a unit that gave up 83 tackles for loss and 41 sacks. And now you have departures resulting in 120 career starts along the offensive line going away. So how do you draw up the offensive system in something that doesn't work and hasn't worked in what Sonny Cumbie has wanted to do here? One thing about their system is they love the slot receiver, and they really get a lot of action out of the slot receiver. And now we've got True Edwards, who's no longer there, and how do you backfill his contribution to what we saw with Louisiana Tech last year? It's just a group that I just don't see a ton of wow factor. I don't think they have it figured out offensively, and so therefore I think we're going to just continue to see these struggles every possession, week in and week out, is just going to be nothing easy offensively for Louisiana Tech, and you have a defensive the guy who's drawing it up and scheming it up is no longer there, and so this defense will be out of position. It might be hard for the front seven to replicate the success they had against the run last year. I really don't see how this team gets over over 6 wins. Frankly, I think it's a miracle that they make a bowl game this year. I think that you get really tough games right out of the gate against Louisiana State, Southern Miss, and then in that 5th game in 5 weeks, they got to go to UTEP, who's going to be an emerging program in Conference USA play, before they hit the bye week. And then on the back end, they've got Western Kentucky. They've got to go to Wazoo, which is a strange out of conference game, long travel spot, the second of back-to-backs after their first of the back-to-back in that situation. They'll be on the other side of the country at Delaware. And then they come home and settle in for 48 hours, and then you're back on the plane to Pullman. Just a really tough travel spot. And then you double back after the Wazoo trip for Liberty. And Liberty's going to be rolling in there ready to just probably lock up their spot in the Conference USA title game. So it just seems like a schedule that's not really conducive to racking up the wins and getting into a momentum situation with your team. And quite frankly, if this season goes as I would expect, I question if Sonny Cumbie's there next year. I think it's going to be time to pull the plug here in Ruston and go in a different direction. I think that there's a strong, especially if you got in on those early 6.5 unders, I can't see a path to 7 wins. There's still some variation in the regular season win market. You can find some juiced 6.5. You can find some kind of -110, -115, 5.5. I still think we're good there. I think this is going to be a team where probably going to be a real struggle to get to a bowl game this season. I don't see it going positively this year in Ruston.
From a team that won just 5 games last year to a team that won twice as many, the Sam Houston Bearcats went 10-3 in 2024, 6-2 in conference play. They won the New Orleans Bowl over Georgia Southern in a shootout, 31-26, 10-1 to win the conference. Win total set at 4.5. It's because they only returned 5 starters, 5 on offense, 0 on defense, 117th in returning production, second to last on defensive production coming back. Casey Keeler, as I mentioned at the top, jumped to Temple in the offseason. In comes Phil Longo and his air raid offense. That was a hit at North Carolina. His dairy raid, not so much at Wisconsin. I'm going to give you the floor here, Duck, for Sam Houston after saying this. I loved Hunter Watson as a dual threat game manager type. And he got the job done last year. There's just no way around it. But I don't think he's the right offensive fit here with only one main target returning in his, receiving core. I have my doubts, if they're going to ask him to throw 25, 30, 35 times a game. I think that could get ugly. I think the turnovers are going to mount. I think the inefficiency is going to rear its ugly head. I think there's going to be some empty drives, some 3 and outs, going to put even more pressure on this defense that is all new faces. Defense was gutted. And you're going to be playing Western Kentucky, in that opener. I think Western could hang 100 on these guys. What are you seeing, and how significant is this philosophical switch from Keeler to Longo, in your opinion?
Well, it's a really interesting change. It's a complete 180 in team DNA. Keeler built this program up at the FCS level. They had a fairly explosive FCS offense, but they always had rock-solid defenses, and that's what they hung their hat on their first couple of seasons in FBS, making the transition. And with Keeler off to Temple, you're bringing in Phil Longo, who's been known for offense. The problem is, like you had mentioned, they don't really have the personnel to run this tempo air raid system with a lot of certainty in what Hunter Watson is going to do at the quarterback position. They lose a lot of key pieces in the skill room. They lose their running back from last season, who was a high producer in Jay Ducker. And the offensive line has some question marks. And so it might be something where the offense gets it kind of figured out as the schedule plays out and goes along. But the real question mark here for me is defensively. You lose your defensive coordinator and half your starting platoon off to North Texas. And when you looked at the spring roster, they were barely able to even formulate a competent two deep in the defensive side of the ball because they just didn't have the talent or the bodies because of the mass exodus of personnel. And so I think that you're really going to be up against it when you look at how much production was lost, how much of the quality talent that Sam Houston State had from last season. It was a unit that really carried their team, especially when their quarterbacks were hurt last year and the offense wasn't clicking. The defense allowed them to kind of hang in there in Conference USA play and carried their team to wins in low-scoring battles. Well, this year it's going to be anything but that. We're going to see a really quick pace tempo offense. I could actually see this offense really having a lack of success and experiencing 3-and-outs, quick possessions, punting a lot, and then that defense gets left out there on the field, and it just is something I don't anticipate going well. I think they could lose their first four games of the season. This Western Kentucky opener will be an indicator on where the offense might be, but like you said, the Toppers are going to be able to put up whatever they want offensively. Then you have UNLV coming to town, which is a mixed bunch, but will certainly have the offense cranking under Dan Mullen, and then they got to go to Hawaii in a Rainbow Warrior revenge spot, a tough long trip there, going to Hawaii, and then they're not going to, I mean, who knows what that's going to look like, what they roll out there against Texas after the bye week. But even when you look at the back half of the schedule in Conference USA play, UTEP will be an emerging team. They got to go to Middle Tennessee. They got to go to New Mexico State. I just don't see this group getting on a roll. And then you've got a strange non-conference road trip at Oregon State where I would anticipate this team would get blasted. So there's several spots that I have circled to fade Sam Houston State this year. I may seek over on a lot of their games if the situation is right, but I don't see this Bearcat team having a lot of success. I don't see them as a player in the conference race as they were a team that kind of had their hand in things last year. I think it's going to be a real struggle for Phil Longo and his staff go under the win total because it's not a lot of winnables here and too much transition.
We've been on the same page for a lot of these teams. I think we could see it split here, a little fork in the road. Talking Middle Tennessee, the Blue Raiders, 3-9 last year, 2-6 in conference play in year one of Derek Mason. 3-9, just I don't think that really describes what happened because those 3 wins came over Tennessee Tech by a touchdown, Kennesaw in a game where they scored only 14 points, and UTEP by a touchdown. Were they close in the other 9 losses? Absolutely not. They got absolutely drummed in those other games. They're 15-1 to win this conference. Their win total is sitting at 4.5, and I think that's just the natural progression year 2 of a coach that people, at least have respect for on the defensive side of the ball. They return a lot of starters, 13 in total, 6 offensively, 7 defensively, 69th overall in returning production, evenly split between O and D. But I look at this. Nick Vadiato, he's a veteran presence at quarterback. But they took away his designed runs last year. They cut his carries from 139 in Stockstill's final year with Middle Tennessee to 86 last fall, and 29 of those were sacks. So I don't think Bodie Reeder's system is going to get better without him running the football or being that rushing threat. He loses Frank Peasant. Amari Kelly's also gone on the portal, and Holden Willis exhausted his eligibility. I don't necessarily see the dynamic playmakers for this offense to take even a half step forward. Defensively, it's supposed to be Mason's calling card, right? Well, they were bottom 20 in just about every key category you can care about. Scoring, total defense, takeaways, havoc, red zone, third down D, all of it. So where's the optimism in your opinion? Because the schedule at Wisconsin, at Nevada, they do avoid UTEP and Liberty. I'm high on both of those teams. But the closing is FIU, Western, at home against Sam Houston, at New Mexico State. Doesn't scream a 3-1 finish, and I think that's what you're going to need to get to 5 or 6 wins. So can you find 5 wins? You're a little bit more bullish on the Blue Raiders than I am.
I am. Early in the spring, I took a mispriced future on Middle Tennessee. They were 25-1 to win the conference. I thought it should have been closer to 16-1, so I put a little play in there. But I think that we have an opportunity for Middle Tennessee to see some significant improvement along the offensive and defensive line and in the linebacker room. And they're going to have to, because when they were bad last year, they were absolutely atrocious. They really needed to battle back against FCS Tennessee Tech, who plays in the bad. Ohio Valley Conference in FCS. It was really ugly in non-conference games against Mississippi, Duke, and Memphis, and in Conference USA play, the offense, while they continued to fight, the defense really gave up a ton of yards and just could not get stops. I think the optimism is that they're in the second year of the system. There are some pieces that you could see develop here in Nicholas Vadiato's senior season in Murfreesboro. I like the running back Middlebrook. I think he could develop. They also bring in Ricky Hunt from Ohio, who could provide some pop in the running back room. I think the receivers have some pretty decent size with Butler, Carter, and A.J. Jones coming in, and Cameron Lacey is pretty shifty and provides a little bit of stretch the field ability there. So there are some pieces that could manifest themselves into a little bit more offensive production. I think that the offensive line continuity, there's a chance. I think that, with a little bit more experience and the returning pieces along the offensive line that they have from last season, there is some optimism that that group can get better. And they'll have to be, because they surrendered 30 sacks last season, and it seemed like Vadiato was just constantly running for his life game in and game out. So I think we'll get some marginal improvement with the offense, and we'll have a little bit more pop in the skill room, something that was missing last season, save for Amari Kelly, who was a great receiver for Middle Tennessee. Defensively, we're going to get experience in the two deep. We're going to have some key pieces returning at all three levels. We've got Bynum coming back for at the DN position, who was a pretty decent player for them last season, along with DeMonte Smith and Shakai Woods. The linebacker group returns 3 seniors. There was a couple transfers from P4 that are coming down that I think will be okay in this defensive scheme. The secondary, it stunk last year. I mean, there's no two ways around it. They surrendered 67% pass completions with 27 passing touchdowns allowed to just 5 interceptions. So the defensive secondary is really going to have to be a unit that steps up and produces more, both against the pass, forcing more turnovers, just having more impact plays provided. So we'll see if that manifests itself out. But I think that there's some talent, and there's a reasonable plausibility that this offense and offensive and defensive trenches takes a bigger step this year in year 2 under Derek Mason. Now, as far as the schedule is concerned, I think they have a winnable FCS opponent in Austin Peay. They will not win against Wisconsin. They go to Nevada, who I'm down on, and they play Marshall, who you are down on, and I'm down on as well. So I don't see either one of those as unwinnables. In fact, a 3-1 non-conference record is something I would not be shocked by. I would not consider their conference opener at Kennesaw State as unwinnable, nor would I consider their they host Missouri State after a bye on October 8th, and I also wouldn't consider that game to be unwinnable. They get Jacksonville State, who's descending. They get FIU at home. They go to Sam Houston State, who's a descending transitional program that's going to have a lot to figure out. And they close their season at New Mexico State. That's one of the harder jobs in the country to produce a roster at, with recruiting and re-recruiting your own people and all the talent influx that they don't have there in Las Cruces. So, yeah, I mean, I see 10 games that are winnable. I see a team that's going to have a lot of shots on goal. You'll have a coach in the second year of their program that is looking to kind of make that next level jump. And while I don't think this is the best team in the conference by far, I definitely put them in that group with UTEP, FIU, to where there could be some pieces that fall together, and this Middle Tennessee State group could rattle off some wins in conference play and kind of be in that upper half of the standings. I don't think bowl game eligibility is out of the question at all for this unit. When I was doing my spring preparation on Middle Tennessee, I was completely assuming that their regular season win total was going to come out 5.5. It didn't. It opened 4.5. And so I've been waiting for this show to talk about this, but I played their regular season win total over 4.5. It's -148. And I think there's a great chance that this group gets to 6-6. I'm not going to necessarily say that I'm going to call for them to win the conference, although that future was mispriced, so I just took a little bit of pizza money on it or whatever. But yeah, I think over 4.5 is a play on this group, and I think we'll see a little bit of improvement with Middle Tennessee State and a much better looking top to bottom roster than what we saw last season in Murfreesboro.
Planting your flag on the Blue Raiders. I'm looking forward to some head-to-head t-shirt bets throughout the season when we get into conference play, because we'll see. I mean, we'll see who emerges as offensive weapons if they exist. There weren't a whole lot of signs of life for me from what I saw on the field. Obviously, college football, that's what you do in the portal, how you reorient your offense and defense in the offseason. So we'll see if Derek Mason can pull a rabbit out of his hat. I disagree, but I mean, that's the beauty of it. We're going to get to see live bullets flying in just a couple weeks, and all of a sudden, all these spreadsheets and predictions go out the window. We'll get back to that. What we need to talk about right now are the final two teams in Conference USA, the bottom of the barrel. I don't know. I'm going to mix it up here. Let's go Kennesaw State first, the Owls. 2-10 last year, 2-6 in conference play. They knocked off Liberty. That was really the shocking win of the year in the conference. And then, in my opinion, they unfairly fired Brian Bohannon, which went over like a fart in church with the alumni, although our producer, Matt Mitchell, thinks that he deserved to be fired because of his time management issues. He's getting sent to the James Franklin cell block of the time management prison there in his own mental palace that he's created. Mitchell hates when coaches screw up the clock trying to run things out, or, the 2-minute drill. So Brian Bohannon at least has one hater in the BBOC universe. I think the guy deserved at least one more shot here, but he is out. Jerry Mack is in. They are 29-1 to win Conference USA, which I'm going to throw in a Liam Neeson sound drop. Your arrogance offends me, sportsbooks. 29-1. You can't give us 100-1. There's no way that they're getting to the Conference USA title game, and you're offering 29-1. Like, spare me. Their win total's 3.5. They returned 10 starters, 3 on offense, 7 on defense, 5th in returning production, 3rd defensively. And as I mentioned, Jerry Mack is in, and just like Willie Simmons, he found major success at an HBCU, leading NC Central, that's North Carolina Central, to the Celebration Bowl in 2016. He's a grown-up. He's got head coaching experience. He has NFL experience. He has coordinator experience at Rice. Here's the issue. His offenses at Rice stunk. Dexter Williams comes in, from Georgia Southern to maybe bolster this passing attack that's going in a totally different direction, throwing away all the option principles that were left over from Bohannon's tenure. But this offensive line could be really bad in pass pro, and I think that's going to hurt Williams and really curtail any opportunity for him to make some hay this year, even in conference play. Defensively, yes, you got a ton of experience, but that comes from a defense that finished outside the top 100 in scoring, total D, havoc, you name it. So I think they have a higher floor on the defensive side by Conference USA standards. I would be shocked if they were truly a bottom 10% defense. But are they going to be some transformational defense that keeps them in every game all season long? Doubtful to me. This is the same defense that lost 33-0 to La Tech to end the season. We just threw some dirt on Sonny Cumbie. We're already, putting for sale signs in his front lawn in Ruston. So let's pump the brakes on Kennesaw doing anything defensively to be able to elevate themselves past, let's call it just a repeat of last year, which was 2 conference wins, one that took a massive upset over the Flames. They're at Wake, they're at Indiana, Arkansas State early. I want to keep an eye on Williams II and how this offense operates pace-wise in particular, because their 2024 offensive metrics are totally meaningless. So you could see a market slow to react to some of the totals, how they're going to play, in terms of an against the spread perspective. I'm just going to play wait and see, but I just want to put it out there, 29-1. Sports books, like, you're making me spit on the ground outside of your books because this is ridiculous. 29-1 is an insult to anybody who knows what they're doing in this space. Give us 100-1 or give us death. What are your thoughts on the Owls?
Yeah, just another year of transition. Surprising they fired their head coach last year, but maybe he did deserve it. I'll say that I think it's just going to be real interesting to see them fully migrate away from the triple option offense, which then morphed into the inverted pistol option, and now it'll be a more traditional set. They want to go fast. They believe that Dexter Williams is the guy to get them where they need to go. I'm not entirely sold on what they bring in. I'm actually stunned that they were able to keep Gabriel Benyard at receiver. I thought he would have certainly been off to bigger and better things, but he's a guy that can provide a little pop offensively. The defense for Kennesaw State, I think that They're really transfer reliant at all three levels, and so it could take some time for this for the defensive line, the linebacker group, and the secondary to gel. If those transfers hit, and if there is some cohesiveness throughout those levels of defense, they could be okay in Conference USA play. We'll need a real big step up in offensive production from what we had last season with Kennesaw State. It was just so brutal at times to watch the Owls operate because they just couldn't get out of their own way until they played Liberty, and then they could. So it was interesting to see how that kind of unfolded in Kennesaw. I don't have a lot to like here. I think they played above their belt class a little bit last year when they covered some big spreads, but I don't see a real any. There's obviously no value in the future, and I don't love anything really regular season win related. I would fade this team in their second game of the season after they play Power 4 Wake Forest on the road. Then they go back on the road to Indiana, and I think that's one where we can kind of see some depth issues and some tired legs in that second game of the season. I would fade them at FIU, and I would fade them in their last game of the season. Liberty's going to have that one circled in red ink. Kennesaw won't be playing for anything, and Liberty will really want to stick it to Kennesaw State in that last game of the season for that inexcusable, embarrassing loss that the Owls handed the Flames last season. So there's about 3 spots I'd say that it's definitely worth fading Kennesaw State, probably more than that with the way this season will shake up for Kennesaw.
Let's close things out in Las Cruces, New Mexico. The days of Diego Pavia feel very far away at this point. This is a team that's in trouble. I mean, let's just call it what it is. The Mexico State Aggies went 3-9 last year, 2-6 in conference. They're 21-1 to win the conference win total at 4.5. 6 returning starters in total, 3 on both sides of the ball. 21st in returning production, 22nd offensively in particular. David Yost is in at offensive coordinator. He's been a journeyman OC at Mizzou, Oregon, Texas Tech, Wazoo, Utah State, most recently at FIU. Fun fact, he was the guy who hired me at Mizzou to be a student assistant 20 years ago. So I appreciate you, David. Elite head of hair. Go ahead and Google him. And personal feelings aside, flow aside, he's a major upgrade as a play caller, in my opinion, in Las Cruces. He's got Logan Fife and a quarterback who, for my money, is the most C+, B- G5 quarterback that they could get. He's a stabilizing force in the quarterback room, but he's not a big difference maker. And he could really use a quality offensive line in front of him, but they have just one returning there. McKee Lee, if he doesn't play really well at left tackle, Fife could be taking a ton of sacks. He held onto the ball way too long when he was at Fresno. I can't get that out of my head. When he's playing against legit defenses at the FBS level, I think he just processes a little bit too slow. Now, frankly, I like DC, Joe Morris's, resume, but he didn't have the pass rushers or the disruptors anywhere on the field last year to make life hard on opposing offenses. All you need to know is some of the scores being laid by teams like La Tech, 30 points, FIU, 34, 42 points to UTEP in a year 0 situation for Scotty Walden. But you look at the portal, they grabbed Gabe Peterson, a 3-star edge rusher from Utah State, another 3-star edge from Boise, Obina Okiki from La Tech to play their jack linebacker position. These are 3-star answers. I don't necessarily, have the most confidence that they're going to make a big jump, but at least they're not going with guys who couldn't get on the field last year or 1 or 2-star guys. At least by recruiting, services, these guys should be difference makers to some degree. Will they be better up front? I think so, but this schedule doesn't allow them to miss many games or many gimmies because there's just not many of them. They got Bryant, who they absolutely should beat. They got Tulsa, another winnable game, Missouri State, Kennesaw, Middle Tennessee, all at home. So you got 5 games right there. To me, those are 5 winnable games. The win total sitting at 4.5. It's a pass for me because I could see a world in which they win those games. The only one in the mix that they're clear favorites over is Bryant, the FCS opponent, to start the season. A single-digit home favorite, probably against the rest of those teams. And upset-wise, I mean, you could see it, against New Mexico, against the Lobos. They're in a transition with a new staff taken over there, so it has upset potential. I guess I'm leaning maybe towards the under, mainly because Tony Sanchez, to me, is a high school coach. That's no disrespect to high school coaches listening. He's a great high school coach. He was absolutely elite, a legend at Bishop Gorman. but that's when he had the best talent that you could get in high school football. He's only surpassed 4 wins once in 6 years as an FBS head coach. You got to prove to me that you're better. So this is a lean to the under, but probably just a stay away from me because it does break my heart to fade the Aggies.
Yeah, the job that Jerry Kill and his staff did there with Diego Pavia is just absolutely incredible. Hats off to that group for being able to win consistently at New Mexico State the way that they did during his tenure there. It's almost an impossible place to recruit to. It's hard to get people to want to go there, so they've really been reliant on JUCO. And they just have their work cut out for them year in and year out. And now with introducing re-recruiting your existing roster where standout players continue to get poached, it's hard to keep people there. It's not like they have the NIL money flowing in. And so it's just a transient team that's constantly going to be battling all of the challenges that are concomitant to playing at the G5 level of college football. So for this particular 2025 version of the New Mexico State Aggies, I think Logan Fife is just kind of a stopgap. I was never wowed by what he did at Fresno State. Even at Montana, he was really never asked to carry the torch, so to speak. So it was just kind of one of those C- type of quarterbacks that they went out and plucked. You could make a case that in 2024, there was no worse quarterback play at the FBS level amongst any teams than what we saw from New Mexico State last year, including Parker Awad, who's battling for the starting job this year. I think the receiver room, they're very excited about at New Mexico State, and the reports out of, at least out of spring practice, was that they've got some dudes that can really make some plays at receiver, so we'll see if that comes to fruition. The offensive line is very young. They lost a lot of key pieces from last year's offensive line, and now they're going to be reliant on a couple of transfers from the FCS ranks, and I'm just not sold that that's going to work out well immediately. From a unit that really struggled last year at times to run the ball and to protect the quarterback, they really didn't do anything offensively very well, and so I'm concerned that now we're going to ask Logan Fife to come in here and try to do all of it at a spot that's going to be his toughest assignment yet, I would assume. Defensively, I think that there's possibility that this maybe the back seven could be okay. I think the linebackers are going to carry the group with Gabe Peterson coming in, Tyler Martinez back, and then Sone Apiu coming back in the linebacker room. So I think the linebacker group is the most experienced of the three levels. Defensively, in my opinion, they're in bad shape. They're relying on FCS transfers in at all the real positions along the defensive line, including nose guard, defensive tackle, and defensive end. I don't see this unit getting a lot of push. They really struggled last year to create any amount of defensive havoc. They only had 14 sacks last season and 44 tackles for loss, and I just don't see immediate turnaround there. When I'm looking at a win total and when I'm analyzing the schedule, I just do not see New Mexico State going on the road and having any real tangible success at Louisiana Tech. They might win the Land of Enchantment pillow fight against New Mexico, but even that'll be a coin flip type of game. At Liberty, Western Kentucky, at Tennessee, and at UTEP, I've got them all penciled in as losses there. I think Middle Tennessee at home is a coin flip game that won't go their way. Missouri State could come in there and really tear up that defense. I think we wouldn't be surprised at all to see that. And, I'm not in love with Tulsa, and I think Tulsa has a long way to go defensively to be very competent, but they do bring in a high-energy coach, and there's at least an element of excitement around the Tulsa program within the confines of that circle. So even the Tulsa game's a coin flip, and I don't think this is a team that's really set to win all their coin flip games. I think that they're probably 0-1 win on the road, probably 3 wins at home. This just looks like 4-8 again. So I did at plus money go under the win total. I'd still recommend it now because you can get a very similar price. I'm just not quite a believer in the Tony Sanchez experiment here at New Mexico State. No matter how much of an element of passion and care, I mean, he really likes this job. He really wants to be here, but it's not something I see working out because of just the obstacles that he's up against in Las Cruces. So under 4.5 and no chance to win the conference.
All right, before we close things out here, biggest storyline and your title game matchup. Maverick McIver, I think it's going to be an absolute retro, throwback, all the good vibes. Bailey Zappi. I want to see Bailey Zappi on the sideline for one of these games, just high-fiving him coming off the field. A lot of high-scoring games. I think their defense is also going to give up a lot of points. That's why I think UTEP is going to leapfrog them, get to the title game, and then lose to Liberty. I think it's going to be an exciting year for Scotty Walden. I want to go ahead and have an opportunity to hedge that ticket at 13-1 with the Miners. Miner Nation. We're getting the gang back together. All the teams that we love rooting for here in Conference USA. So that is my card in terms of the narrative and the title game matchup. What are yours?
Well, the narrative is absolutely MacGyver. I mean, we saw Bailey Zappi tear up Conference USA with a similar nature when he brought his OC in Zach Kitley from Houston Baptist, now called Houston Christian. And so I think that this will be something that will just electrify Conference USA. You know, for me, this is a league that is often regarded as the worst group of five league as far as power ratings are concerned. And we've had some inconsistencies with this kind of being the stepping stone league to getting teams from the FCS into FBS competition. But it's a league that's embraced that. It's a league that really bridges the gap for all of the people who live and breathe college football to get weekday football in earlier than November action. So that starts October 6th. And it's really a fun league that I enjoy watching. And so I think we're going to get a lot of good football within this league this year. It may not manifest itself with out-of-conference results, but I think within league play, we'll see a lot of competitive football this season, top to bottom. I think there's Liberty and then about 6 other teams that could possibly win this league. So I think Liberty will be in the championship game. And you know what? When I look at Middle Tennessee, they don't have to play Liberty in the regular season. They don't have to play UTEP in the regular season. Their toughest game in conference play is going to be at Western Kentucky, which is a major rival for both those schools. There's 100 miles of hate. And I think, you know, you win that game, you're really in control here. So I think I hung my hat on the win total over. I think Middle Tennessee has a really good shot to play for the conference title. So let's pencil in the Raiders.
I think it's time to Scooby-Doo pull the mask off you. Oh, it's Brent Stockstill here as my co-host. Hey, listen, you're sticking your neck out. It's the very first preview of the season. I love it. We'll certainly come back to it if the Blue Raiders lay an egg multiple times this fall. But as you mentioned, and I agree, this is a wide open conference for that number 2 spot to compete with Liberty. So we'll see who ends up holding that spot throughout the season and punching a ticket to the Conference USA title game. That is a wrap for our preview here. We got more coming up from the G5. We got the American. Forget about the AAC. That's old news. It is purely the American now, and then the beloved MAC. And you know when we talk MAC, that means Stuckey coming in with his MAC manifesto. No stone left unturned. He can't wait to talk specialists, kickoff coverage, punt coverage, place kicking. Stuckey has you covered every which way when it comes to the Mid-American Conference. We also, next week, will have all of our Power 4 conference previews between Stuckey and Colin Wilson. And then we got something really exciting on tap. We got a live show. That's right. Week 0. Come join us in Chicago. Joe's on Weed at 11 a.m. We are going to be watching Farmageddon, K-State and Iowa State roll on through. You can meet Stuckey, Colin Wilson, myself. Duck's going to be there. The drinks are going to be flowing. The whole crew. We're going to have a great time. So please, if you are in the greater Chicago area, or really the Midwest in general, just drive on in, say hello to us, watch some football. We are so close to the season being back. For Josh Nunn, a.k.a. Duck, I'm Mike Calabrese. This has been the Big Bets on Campus podcast, our Group of 5 deep dive preview of Conference USA now in the books. We'll catch you next time.